And that's the exact moment I stopped trusting the spec sheet, because nothing about this setup should feel like this anymore. On paper, this thing lost years ago. Old motor, old design, gear driven, in a world that moved on. And yet there's one detail buried so deep that most people never notice it until they've already spent their money somewhere else. If you're shopping for a racing wheel in 2025, you're being sold a very clean, very confident story. More torque equals more realism, newer equals better, direct drive equals endgame. But that story skips over the part that actually decides whether a wheel still feels alive after the honeymoon phase is over. I didn't expect to come to this conclusion either, especially not after months of using newer, stronger hardware. But once I mounted this back onto a modern rig and ran it through today's racing titles, something uncomfortable happened. It exposed what most upgrades quietly take away. By the end of this, you'll know whether buying this wheel in 2025 is a smart decision or a mistake disguised as nostalgia. And the answer isn't what forums, comment sections, or spec charts would have you believe. And it starts with the part everyone skips. From the first lap, the feedback feels talkative, not stronger, not cleaner, just more present. And that sounds impossible when you remember how old this hardware actually is. The Logitech G923 is built on a design philosophy that predates the current direct drive obsession by years. Gear-driven force feedback, conservative torque numbers, and a chassis that hasn't meaningfully changed since the G29 era. In theory, it should feel dated the second you turn the wheel, but instead of feeling mute, it feels busy in a way that newer wheels sometimes don't. The steering doesn't just resist you, it communicates small vibrations, texture changes, engine harmonics, subtle warnings before grip disappears. And this is where that buried detail begins to matter, because this wheel isn't relying purely on motor force to tell its story. TrueForce is the part most reviews mention and then immediately move past. But it isn't a gimmick layered on top of force feedback. It's a second language. The wheel is listening directly to the game's audio engine, translating RPMs, surface texture, drivetrain strain, and engine load into physical feedback layered on top of traditional forces. Instead of one clean signal, you get a conversation. And that conversation becomes more important as games get more complex. The tension here is obvious. Gear-driven systems are supposed to be the weakness. You can feel the gears. Sometimes they clunk. Sometimes transitions aren't perfectly smooth. If you've spent time on a direct drive wheel, you will notice it immediately. And for a lot of people, that's where the evaluation stops. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Perfect smoothness can actually erase detail. When feedback becomes too sanitized, too refined, you lose the micro information that tells you what the car is about to do, not just what it's doing right now. Real cars aren't perfectly smooth. They vibrate and they chatter. They warn you in messy ways. And in chasing purity, a lot of newer setups accidentally filter that out. This is where opinions split, and honestly they should, because if your priority is raw torque and absolute fidelity under extreme load, this isn't your wheel. But if your priority is connection, feeling like the car is talking back to you lap after lap, the conversation changes. That becomes even clearer the moment you hit the brakes. Budget wheels usually collapse right here. Soft pedals, long travel, inconsistent braking, that forces you to relearn muscle memory every session. And if that were the case here, none of this argument would survive. But the G923's brake pedal doesn't behave like a cheap accessory. It's stiff, intentionally stiff. It resists you in a way that forces pressure-based braking instead of distance-based braking. Your leg learns consistency faster than your brain does. It's not a load cell in the purest sense, but it mimics the behavior closely enough that consistency improves almost immediately. That matters far more in modern racing games than peak torque ever will. Braking zones are tighter. Physics engines punish inconsistency harder. And the moment you stop guessing and start repeating inputs, lap times stabilize. What's surprising is how well this holds up across platforms. This wheel doesn't fight you, you plug it in and it works. Presets are already there. Force feedback profiles exist. TrueForce options appear exactly where they should. And in a landscape where new hardware often means firmware updates, compatibility issues, and endless tweaking, that kind of reliability becomes a feature in itself. Now here's where 2025 complicates everything. Direct drive wheels are no longer exotic. They're smaller, cheaper, and far more accessible than they were just a few years ago. Options like the Moza R3 exist at similar price points, offering cleaner force feedback, stronger motors, and expandable ecosystems. On paper, they win, and in certain setups, they absolutely do. But those setups come with trade-offs that aren't always obvious at checkout. Platform limitations, ecosystem lock-in, less universal game support, and sometimes a strangely sterile driving feel that only reveals itself after long sessions. When you step back and look at how most people actually use their sim rigs, mixed titles, mixed platforms, short sessions between real-life obligations, the G923 starts to make more sense than it should. It doesn't demand commitment. It doesn't punish you for stepping away. It doesn't require constant tuning to feel right again. And that's what pushed me to do something a little different before wrapping this up. Instead of ending on another hot lap or another circuit comparison, I loaded up Euro Truck Simulator 2, not stock, fully loaded, graphics overhaul, realistic physics, cabin shake, suspension mods, sound packs, the whole thing tuned to feel as close to real-world driving as that game can get. And suddenly the strengths of this wheel became impossible to ignore. Low speed feedback matters more here than peak force, and subtle road texture, engine vibration, weight transfer through long corners. The wheel isn't fighting you, it's breathing with the truck. Every bump, every gear change, every stretch of imperfect asphalt comes through in a way that feels grounded instead of exaggerated. It's the kind of test that exposes weaknesses fast, and instead of falling apart, the G923 settled in, calm, communicative, comfortable for long sessions, the kind of driving where immersion isn't about adrenaline but about believability. And that's when it really clicked. This wheel doesn't chase moments, it survives time. So no, it's not the best racing wheel of 2025. But it might be the most misunderstood one, because in a market obsessed with upgrades, this thing quietly exposes what we lose when we chase specs instead of sensations, and that's why, against all logic, it refuses to disappear. If you want to see more tests like this, make sure to subscribe and check out the links for the steering wheels in the description and shop. I'll leave you with that Euro Truck run playing out, fully modded, fully dialed in, just letting the wheel do what it does best. And while that's rolling, I'm genuinely curious, what game should I push this setup through next? Peace out.